Hi, everybody. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to log on. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. So thanks for joining us. All right, how are we looking, Leah? Think we're ready?
Yeah, it looks like we've leveled out for right now.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight for our initial town hall meeting on coastal steelhead season development for the upcoming season. With me tonight and carrying most of the water is James Losey, and as you probably know, James is our Region 6 Fish Program Manager. So tonight's meeting is one of 4 town hall meetings that we'll be conducting between now and late November, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the schedule here in a minute or two. But before we do that, would like to go over just some Zoom basics. So James, if you could go to the, thank you, sir. So just some kind of guidelines and rules around Zoom. So first, and just out of the gate, all callers, you're going to be muted upon entry. You can type a question through the Q&A function or ask a question by raising your hand. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand by dialing *9 on your phone, or if you're calling from a computer, you can find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and we'll be able to call on you. So when you're called on for a question or comment, we encourage you to speak up and provide comments live. To speak, you'll need to unmute. I forget to do that about 6 times a day during all the meetings that I attend. But don't forget to unmute yourself by clicking that mute button on your computer or your device. And if on a device, you got to enter that *6 if you're calling from a landline. If you have a technical issue during tonight's webinar, please drop us a note in the Q&A and we'll help you through it. I think very importantly, given the I'll just say, given the experience over the course of the last few months, there's a lot of passion around this topic on multiple sides of the issue. So just request that you be respectful of each other. If you're not talking, please make sure you mute your phone. We ask that you're tough on the issues and the questions, but not on the people or any particular organizations. Really want to emphasize that we need you to refrain from personal attacks, insults, or threats to others. I think very importantly is we all have values around this issue, and like I said, perspectives. But let's try to assume good intentions from others who maybe don't share your perspectives. Ask that you speak and act professionally. Please do not use any offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity, and allow for a balance of speaking time. So try to limit the number of times you speak on each topic if you can. We ask that you share your questions or comments in written format on this webpage that we've developed. I think many of you are familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, this webpage is going to be pretty important moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, James. So before we dive into the agenda, I wanted to say a few words about where we've been and how we're planning to move forward with this season. So after last year, I think one thing is pretty clear to the department. I mean, we recognize that the public wants more engagement in the season setting and development process. To that end, regional staff have worked really hard with our co-managers to develop a schedule that helps us meet this need. Our co-managers have agreed to the timeline that we're going to be talking about here. And I just want to extend my appreciation and deep appreciation, I guess I should say, for their help with this. The timeline we're talking about is, especially for those of you who have been involved in this in the past, you're going to see this timeline and you're going to recognize that it's an accelerated schedule. And without that buy-in and cooperation and partnership with our co-managers, it wouldn't be possible. So in terms of this year's schedule, we built in touch points with you that will correspond with the co-manager season setting development process, this new process that we've agreed to with our co-managers. And the purpose of these, what we're calling town hall meetings, is to bring all of you along with us as the season setting process develops. And during this whole process, we want to collect and consider your feedback again throughout the whole process. So maybe just to give you a little deeper dive into what we're going to be doing between now and December, early December, hot off the press, right? Just last week, we exchanged our survey data with our tribal co-managers, and that brings us to today, our first town hall, our workshop. This is really focused on a pre-season, pre-forecast forum for us to review the 2021 season and initiate the conversations for possible options for 21-22. This is going to include a review of what we expected to occur in 2021 or last season and what we currently know about what actually occurred. And just be advised that this is, what you're going to hear tonight is preliminary. It's what we think to the best of our ability. There's a lot of information that hasn't been analyzed and we're not able to present on tonight, but you'll hear about it as we progress. We're not making, one thing I want to make really clear is that we're not making any fishery management decisions tonight. However, that said, we want to talk about next steps in the process, make sure that people understand our schedule and have the opportunity to engage. We're going to be talking about some preliminary indicators for returns. We're going to talk about possible fishery options and how we're thinking about the decision-making process, and really want your feedback on that. And we really want to make sure that people have this schedule in front of them so they're able to engage. So moving on from tonight, the middle of next month, so in mid-August, we're going to have our spawning escapement estimates finalized with our co-managers. In early September, we're going to exchange that information with our co-managers, the forecast information. And then we'll in early October, we are scheduled to have our preseason forecast agreements finalized with our co-managers. That's going to bring us into mid-October. The co-manager policy meetings will be initiated. And again, the purpose of those is developing the management plans. After that happens, we're going to have our second town hall meeting where we'll be able to report back to you all with respect to the final escapements numbers and forecasts that we saw. And we'll be talking about the management framework. We're going to be talking about trends in abundance and environmental indicators, things like escapement estimates and forecasts. We're going to talk to you about what concerns that we have in terms of either probable or possible conservation issues that we're worried about. You'll also see an analysis of staff, a staff analysis of options that we've heard from you all starting tonight up until that October town hall. So we want to make sure that we capture that tonight and throughout the process via our webpage. And then what we'll do at the end of that town hall is be very clear about what's next on the agenda, right? So we're going to review this schedule that I'm talking about tonight and make sure folks have a clear understanding of what they can expect in terms of next steps. In November, we're going to have our town hall number 3. This is going to be the final preseason planning meeting. We'll have initial recommendations from staff for the seasons, the dates, the areas, and some regulatory options. We want to hear your questions. We want to solicit some feedback. We want to again review what's next on the agenda from a next steps in the process perspective. So again, there's no question about what you all can expect from us moving forward. And just a note here, this third town hall is going to be the final opportunity for us to meet with you and capture your feedback prior to finalizing the management plans with the co-managers. Moving into mid-November, those management plans are scheduled to be finalized with our co-managers. In November, we're looking at briefing the Fish and Wildlife Commission on the 19th. About our plans and what we're seeing and what we expect. That'll move us into late November and our final town hall meeting. The purpose of this town hall is going to be for us to communicate with you all our decision on the agreed to fishing plans. And that will bring us to December 1st, where the process will conclude, this planning process will conclude with the announcement of our coastal winter steelhead fishing regulations. And again, I know I mentioned this before, but I want to call your attention to the web address at the bottom right-hand side of this slide. And I think Aaron's going to put this in the chat for us, so you all have access to it and can write it down or do a copy paste thing. But this web page is going to be very important for those of you who are interested in coastal steelhead and this progress. It's going to be the kind of the repository for the recordings of our town hall presentations. We'll have our data available to you, so you can grab that data in PDF form, and using that data you can I guess create some of the graphs that you're going to see tonight and throughout the process. And it's also very importantly going to be a place where you can provide us feedback or ask questions. One thing that happened last year is we were inundated with emails and phone calls and text messages, and it was very difficult to keep up with that. We did our very best. We wound up pointing folks to this frequently asked questions document that we kept up to date on that web page. So we don't want to, we're trying to learn from last year and make improvements. So we've added this portal where you can provide us feedback, you can ask questions, you can give us your perspective there, and it'll be a kind of a one-stop shop for us to be able to capture all of that stuff and consider it as we progress with our co-managers through the process. So I strongly encourage you to visit that page very frequently over the course of the next few months, because it's going to be the key to keeping pace with the process, which is an accelerated process, as I've mentioned, and a lot's going to happen in a very short amount of time here very soon. So maybe James, the next slide, please. So kind of getting into the meat of tonight's agenda, we're going to be talking about some background information. I realize that many of you are well versed in much of what you're going to hear, but we think it's important for folks who are maybe a little bit newer, who maybe didn't participate in last year's town hall meeting last November. So we're going to provide spend some time on background. We're going to talk about steelhead biology and stock assessment. We're going to talk about trends and goals. So these first three items are things that many of you have probably heard before, but I want you to hang in there. We got some new information for you. We're going to talk about the review of last season's what occurred last season, and then we're going to kick off the conversation about regulation options for 21-22. And with that, I'm going to take a drink of water and I'm going to turn it over to James. James, first of all, anything I missed on that you wanted to add to the first couple slides?
No, I think you nailed it, Kelly. Appreciate that. Mic check, you're hearing me all right there?
Yep, sound good. You don't look that well, but you.
I know how you feel about me. Yeah, so I just advanced this slide to just highlight this first bullet item, but I also wanted to flag for folks. So I'm James Losey, I'm the regional program manager for Region 6. There's a map there of the area I'm thinking most about. There's different colors, those highlight different districts. It's not important for this discussion other to recognize there's teams of biologists in each one of these districts. Big high five to them. Like Kelly mentioned, a lot of hard work went into this, and there's teams involved in that work. Also want to flag public affairs, appreciate all the work they've done. And then we've got Leah Snyder here in the background helping us with questions in the comments, so she'll keep us up to speed on that. And then on this map, what you can see, what is important is that we've got a bunch of labels there. Those are the populations of steelhead we're going to focus most on tonight. And then I've also flagged over here, the Puyallup and the Nisqually are those that are threatened under the Endangered Species Act. We're not going to focus on them tonight, but I just want to flag that we use those as reference points at this stage, and it's nice for other folks to see the way we think about coastal steelhead relative to what we're seeing in other places. So I just flag it for that reason. I think that's all we need for background information, in terms of the map and stuff. The last thing I guess I would flag, last year we dug in really deep to this management background. Hope we got people sort of up to speed. And for some folks, you already knew it, but we're gonna, move a little faster through this because we're pretty excited to get to the end here where we can hear what you guys think and provide some new ideas that we hadn't thought of. So this key terms, I showed this last year. I'm not going to read these this time, but I do want to flag a couple of them. This fourth one down, escapement. I'm going to talk a lot about that. Kelly mentioned you can read these on your own. You've got them, this PowerPoint, available on that website. But the escapement is the number of steelhead that survive to the spawning grounds or the hatchery. So, that's our major benchmark as fish managers. Have we put enough fish on the spawning grounds to support sort of this long-term sustainability of, these fish and the fisheries? And then a couple down, you can see run size here. So that's an important concept we're going to talk a lot about, and that's the number of steelhead returning to the freshwater. So that's, you can think of it as before fisheries occurred, or the way I like to think about it is it's the number of fish that escaped plus the number that were harvested or fishing related mortality. So that's the total number of fish to the river. And again, we'll have questions at the end if there's terms here we've said that aren't clear. So really important to sort of overarching theme with steelhead management on the coast and in Region 6 and across the state is we have this guiding document called the Statewide Steelhead Management Plan. It's available on the website. It's a relatively short document. It's pretty concise, and it focuses primarily on these 4 parameters. These are parameters that we're targeting as fish managers. They're abundance, productivity, distribution, and diversity. You can read about these in the management plan, but what you're going to find is the most clearly defined parameter here is really abundance. So we're going to focus on that today, but I want to make sure folks recognize as fish managers, we're thinking about these other parameters that we know are really vital to supporting steelhead populations. So if we kind of zero in on the abundance parameter here, the way we think about abundance and the guidance document describes it is that we have these 2 sort of tiers or thresholds that we used depending on the status of the population preseason. So just simply put, you know, if a run size is expected to come in high or above the escapement goal, we manage fisheries or design fisheries to ensure that we meet that escapement goal. And we'll talk more about, you know, the specifics there. But there's also this alternative where we forecast runs coming in, you know, below or well below the escapement goal before anyone goes fishing. And in that scenario, you know, there's options associated with that. But what the management plan says is that in no case in this scenario should we exceed a 10% impact from all fisheries. So this is a conservative management approach right from the start when we have these forecasts. And this doesn't mean we're targeting 10% as the exploitation rate. You know, we're not designing fisheries around that, but rather we're aiming not to exceed that while targeting hatchery populations or other species. So, and again, we'll revisit that idea. So not necessarily described explicitly in the management plan are some of these other considerations that we, you know, just need to flag up front. With steelhead, they spawn over this and enter the rivers over this protracted time. So we have these limited in-season tools, right? We don't have dam counts in most places. So often by February, March, we're interested in how steelhead are doing, but we don't have these refined tools like you might see on the Columbia River or other places. We know there's uncertainty around effort shifts. So if we close one river we're really worried about and sort of reduce fishing pressure, we know anglers are pretty good, particularly steelhead anglers, at jumping in their car and go finding another river to fish. And so when we have assumptions about a fishery and how, you know, folks are going to interact with steelhead, but we close the neighboring fishery or change it in some way, all of a sudden some of those violations are you know, not met. Or excuse me, some of those assumptions are violated. We also have a recent history of over forecasting, and this isn't, you know, sort of a kick to the folks doing this work, the technical work, but rather we have declining steelhead populations in many places. And what that means is when we use past data to inform us about the future, there's just a high risk of, you know, over predicting what's to come back. So that may continue in the future, but it's definitely been a pattern over the past. We have tribal co-managers, we have partners that we manage these fisheries with. You know, there's a variety of tribal governments across Region 6, and we work collaboratively with tribal co-managers. We also design fisheries to ensure that, you know, we're not violating treaty rights, and so that's an important consideration. We have a national park, a big one in Region 6, the Olympic National Park. You know, variety, almost all of our rivers enter the Olympic National Park at some point, so they're also partners in management. Escapement goals, I'm going to dig in deep on that one later. And then we have run timing considerations. There's uncertainty around early time steelhead. Are they contributing to productivity and abundance in different ways than late time steelhead? Are fish that enter the rivers in December spawning in different locations? So these are things we're thinking about. So that's what I've got on steelhead management background. There's a lot more information we can cover afterward if folks have sort of question marks there, but I want to jump right into, you know, steelhead biology and stock assessment and just share a couple important notes for this discussion. So what you're looking at here, of course, is a couple circles. We typically see life cycle like this for salmon, where they're moving between freshwater and marine. For steelhead, it's the same, you know, concept here, where steelhead are anadromous. They utilize both environments. But one thing that you'll notice is this overlap period, you know, the interface between freshwater and marine. They overlap here like they do with many salmon species, but it's really, you know, I think an important consideration, particularly for steelhead. When I add, you know, sort of the lines here that describe what steelhead do in these environments, what you notice is there's a few more lines than what we see with salmon. You know, we've got the important thing to mention is, you know, steelhead on their out migration towards sea have this opportunity to forego, you know, going out to sea and actually remaining in freshwater for their entire life. So these are our rainbow trout. We have wild rainbow trout across Washington state. And on the coast, these are a really important part of our steelhead population. We know a resident rainbow trout can produce anadromous offspring, so juvenile steelhead that go out to sea, and vice versa. So this is an important consideration when thinking about the life cycle of steelhead. I'm going to pop up here I'm going to try to share some stock assessment work on this slide. Just by popping up, during the different parts of this life cycle, what we're doing as fish managers and biologists. So at the early stage, we release hatchery fish in some systems and clip adipose fins and add coated wire tags and things like that to track them. We also have wild populations out migrating, and we capture both of those in these smolt traps. We collect scales from wild steelhead on their out migration to try to understand what year these fish immigrated out of the gravel. We can move into this sort of ocean phase. I've added a circle around this, sort of early ocean period, and that's intentional. The reason I did that is because this is a really critical period for steelhead. This first month or even the first winter in the ocean is the period of time when, all the way up to 99% of our juvenile steelhead are lost at sea. Mortality is extremely high during this phase and every single year, and it can range, from 80 to 99% mortality. The problem, we know mortality is high, but there's a lot of information we don't know about steelhead during this phase. We have some early work here, from fisheries that demonstrated that steelhead migrate rapidly offshore in kind of a unique way relative to our other salmon. So they're headed off the continental shelf, they're surface oriented in the top 30 meters of the water column, and some of them are shooting all the way to Japan in really rapid speed. Because there's a ton of data gaps about this phase and a lot of mortality takes place here, we've been part of a bunch of collaborative work. We won't have time to talk about it today, but tagging and tracking fish and trying to understand where they're going and why in some years mortality is so high. And then when fish, those that survive the ocean migration, they come back return to our fisheries. I've highlighted a couple of components here. This is a run timing graph. You don't need to know the specifics, but I'm just demonstrating we receive really high quality data from our tribal co-managers in their gillnet fishery. They also sample, our tribal co-managers in most cases sample scales and genetics and length. And so we receive the bulk of our biological information on the coast comes from our tribal co-managers. For sport fish monitoring, we have catch record card system that folks I think are pretty familiar with. And we have really limited creel. So, the method monitor sport fisheries using, interviewers that stand on the bank or float the rivers, extremely limited on the coast. Really the Hoh River is where that's focused, and in the smaller scale on the Quileute. And I'll talk more about that. And then what you're seeing here is a picture of a stock assessment biologist in a helicopter counting nests or reds of steelhead. So there's a little shiny spot here. This is a red. We'll talk more about how that works, but it's a really important component of our stock assessment work. And then finally, we have hatcheries. So we generate really high quality data at these hatcheries. We have amazing teams here, handling fish every single year, different species. But for steelhead, we receive a lot of really important information from these hatchery programs. And they're important for sort of the management of these fisheries. So that was fast. I kind of rapid speed through this, but we can revisit it later if folks want. And then also, aside from revisiting it, this last thing that'll pop up, these are a bunch of resources that we lean on heavily. These are peer-reviewed publications, internal reports. There's hundreds more, but we flagged a few of these and put them online so you can grab them and read this information for yourself. So the next thing I want to talk about is this period I've circled in red, this early ocean migration period. We've heard a lot about the climate, specifically around steelhead. We know that this is important for steelhead, and partly because of their behavior. They spend a lot of time in this environment. So I wanted to highlight this work that we've been tracking pretty closely. This graph came from a paper by Chang and his co-authors. And what's being demonstrated here, I'm not a physical oceanographer, but this is stuff we're watching closely. So this is an index that we use to measure ocean heat content. So the ocean stores heat. And what this graph is showing us is that the ocean is storing more heat than it ever has before. That's a concern for a species, when we look at the ocean heat content, where it's really surface level heat we're talking about. A species like steelhead that occupies this part of the environment, we know this is a concern. So in 2020, Chang published this paper showing that, each year appears to be higher than the rest. 2019 was especially high and maybe represented sort of this peak. We then saw that the following year, it looked like Cheng published another paper demonstrating that we actually saw higher temperatures in 2020. So the trajectory is steep and it's clear, and we wanted to flag that. But we can also, zoom in a little closer on things that we know directly influence steelhead. So we know steelhead can swim, they can move into environments that are more suitable. And so a metric that we look more closely at is this ocean indicator metric called the North Pacific Gyre Oscillation. I'm not gonna, try to educate folks, or folks that already know about the NPGO. We're not gonna spend a lot of time talking about the details. But what I wanna flag here is that the NPGO is closely related to things like sea surface temperature and salinity and upwelling, these parameters that we know are important to steelhead. But even more importantly, it's really tied to ocean productivity. So phytoplankton, zooplankton, forage fish, things steelhead eat. And we're not the first to identify this. There's been a lot of great work that's demonstrated this really close, tight relationship between coastal steelhead and changes in the NPGO. And so what you're looking at here is NPGO between January and March. So this is kind of the table is being set for steelhead that are entering the ocean. And you can see it fluctuates between these, red sort of warm ocean conditions, low productivity periods into these high productivity cold periods. And then you can see recently, in most recent years, we've seen these, really warm conditions. Folks have heard a lot about the blob and things like that. So I think this is not a big surprise to folks. But what I think is really important is if we zoom in on these recent years, this is the same graph, just cut short. This is, 2009 through 2020. And you can really get a feel for this period we're stuck in right now, these warm ocean conditions. And if you plot steelhead survival below this, you can see how steelhead survival has fluctuated really clearly with changes in the ocean conditions here described for the NPGO. So what we're saying, just to make this clear, is coastal wild steelhead, we see these years of high survival, high productivity when the NPGO is positive and the food web is productive. Folks should also notice there's this big gap in the data. These are the most recent years from 2017 on. I know a lot of people really understand this steelhead life cycle pretty clearly, but just to flag it, fish that entered the ocean in 2016, this blue bar here, returned to our rivers in 2017, 18, 19, 20, some in 21. And so this graph, this survival rate represents that complete brood that has come back and returned and demonstrated how well it did in the ocean. For fish that entered the ocean in 2017, we've seen the majority of them, but not all of them. You don't need a fish manager or biologist to tell you that things have not been good for steelhead. If you go out there fishing, what we're seeing is that these are the conditions that steelhead have been faced with. And likely the conditions our steelhead have been faced with, into future years. So this is, provides some expectation for folks as we move forward. So I know I'm showing a lot of data here, but I'm going to keep moving, and I want to just, for comfort level, let folks know we will have time to revisit this stuff. So we move sort of from this ocean period to what we as Fish and Wildlife, employees really monitor. This is the thing we're out there actually counting and enumerating, and it's our benchmark for success. This is the escapement or the number of fish that made it back to the spawning grounds. So, on the right, this is my buddy John Rohr and colleague counting reds. He's standing by a big steelhead nest there, and we count these. We expand them for actual fish. And what we end up with is these really nice graphs. This is the Chehalis River. And you can see there's these bars that are tall. These are years where there was a lot of steelhead spawning. And then we see these dips in steelhead abundance or escapement. So we can then put on top of this what our escapement goal is. So the number that we're targeting to make it to the spawning grounds after fisheries. And for the Chehalis River, this is 8,600 fish. That's the escapement goal. And the point here is that in some years we make it, in some years we don't. Recent years, our success in meeting the escapement goal has been limited. I'm using this as an example. There's more data here we'll show folks in coming slides. But so to sort of get ahead of like what we're thinking as we're moving through these seasons, we can also look at kind of higher resolution. Where were these reds counted, or where were these steelhead spawning? And so if you put on top of that graph I just showed you, now we're breaking it out by specific reaches in the Chehalis. And we're not going to dig in this today, but I just want to flag for folks that are thinking about, areas on the Olympic Peninsula. We've got, Joe Boucher and others up there doing the same work. This is great work by Court Holt. We have folks in the Willapa doing this type of stuff. So these are data we're going to look closely as we move through the summer in this process. And then I've flagged a couple papers here. If folks want to know how we count reds, why these different populations are important, there's resources online on that link that Kelly talked about for you. So I'm going to just pause and sort of look to Leah and make sure there's not some comment in the comment section there that's just critical that we don't address before we keep moving.
There was one by Wes Hoppler, and he wanted to clarify the 10% incidental limit, or is it targeted fishery, or are targeted fisheries allowed when run size is expected to be less than escapement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what we're talking about, that Wes is bringing up there is that we've got these two thresholds. When we've got high abundance, we manage our fisheries to meet those escapement goals. When we have forecasts coming in below the goal, high confidence that we're not going to meet escapement before anyone goes fishing, we have a restriction there. And that restriction is not to exceed 10% exploitation rate. And why that's there is and folks know this, I don't need to tell folks this, I think, but in November and December, while steelhead start to enter our systems, we have coho fisheries that are really important to folks. And so we do have some flexibility to produce, fishing plans targeting other species or runs of hatchery steelhead if we think we can meet that 10% exploitation rate or not exceed it. So important to note, we're not targeting 10%. And in fact, closing fisheries in the face of that scenario is within the guidelines of the statewide steelhead management plan. So very last slide I shared tonight, we'll talk through those scenarios a little more explicitly. So thanks for that question, Wes. So I'm going to move through these trends and goals. I want to highlight one key point here. We're going to talk a lot about the most recent year, what happened last year, but that's coming next. These trends and goals are really focused around the highest quality data we have, and that's not coming from the fishery that just took place. So when you're thinking about the most recent year in these graphs, that's what we're talking about, is a year and a half ago. So here's a trend line or a graph showing changes in the number of steelhead that return to the Chehalis River. This is an example of what we're looking at. I've shown this a number of times, but I'm going to use this one to walk us through how this graph works. So on the horizontal axis, we have 1980 to 2020. On the vertical axis, we have the number of steelhead that return to the river. So this is run size. You can see for the Chehalis, we've got these ups and downs. It's important to notice that the ups, the periods of high abundance, are not as stronger recently as they used to be. And these periods of low abundance have actually strengthened. So when we're low in the Chehalis, it looks like they're either extended periods of time or they're lower than typical. I'm then going to place on here the escapement goal. So we have a run size that comes in. We have a goal we're going to try to target. And then after fisheries, we have numbers of fish that entered the spawning grounds. And I just put that line on there. That's the gray dotted line. So what you can see now is you got run size on top. After fisheries, we have fish that spawned, that's the escapement, and the space between those two lines represents harvest that took place by both the state and tribal co-managers. Another important thing to flag is, this dotted line, when we're under it with that gray line, we did not meet our management objective, right? And so you can see in recent years in the Chehalis, we have a number of years, the last 4, where we did not meet the escapement goal. So I'm going to move through our populations quick now, one after another, and all the graphs are going to look just like this. And I'll just point out a couple key points. Oh, and then one more thing we added, kind of a new feature here. There's really interest in looking at the trend. People want to know, is it increasing or decreasing over the entire time series, not just today? So I've added this pink line that describes the trend line. So this is the direction the population is headed in terms of run size. So each population will have this. So for the Chehalis, it's negative. Now we're looking at the hump tulips. You can see we've got these, few different peaks. Again, the peaks are getting, high abundance periods are not as strong as they used to be. And you can also see this declining trend. The hump tulips, we've also seen this situation where the last couple of years we haven't met escapement. If we look at the Willapa here, we don't have the same time series we do in other places, fewer number of data points, but you can see a similar trend that's negative and a recent uptick in the last couple of years. Here we're looking at the upper Quinault. This is the area of the Quinault River that we manage and target wild and hatchery steelhead. So you can see a more stable trend, but when you look at the escapement estimate around the escapement goal, you can see there's a number of years where we fail to meet that escapement goal. This is Queets Clearwater, similar negative trend as you're seeing in other populations, and one of the steepest declines that we're seeing. Here we're moving up the coast, and I'm moving fast, I recognize that, but I want to make sure we provide time at the end here. This is the Hoh River. We have higher success here in meeting our escapement goal than many of the others. But again, this pretty steep slope, declining trend, and we're getting closer and closer to that escapement goal through this time series. And then the last coastal river I want to show here is the Quileute. The declining trend here is not as steep. This is good news. It is negative. The period we've really focused on and we're thinking hard about is this most recent period from 2000 on. This recent decline has been extremely steep. And so as we see in recent years, we're finding that these management constraints are becoming tighter and tighter in terms of meeting our conservation goals. And then I'm going to show a couple quick slides for the Puget Sound region, just as a reference point. This is the Nisqually River in deep South Puget Sound to see real negative trend there. And then this 1990s period where we saw this decline, we just didn't see that second peak for the Nisqually like we saw on the coast. So we're stuck in this really low abundance period. Real similar story with Puyallup River. So this is a lot of material. We did this last year. We walked through this stuff pretty fast, but what we're looking for this year, sort of, move the dial a little bit, is a way that we can look at all of these populations in one slide and really identify, do we have these chronic areas that we're really focused on improving? And do we have places where maybe, we could shift back to the status quo and not be so concerned with it? So I want to share with folks how we did this. And if people just do not like this graph or this technique, then we won't show it again. But here's the way I want to walk through this. On the right, what you're looking at is the same Chehalis River graph we've shown over and over. I'm using an example. On the left, what we've got is what looks kind of like a bullseye, and we've got these percentages that move up and down. And what we want to look at is the short-term changes in abundance of steelhead in each one of these rivers. And we can do it by taking the most recent year with this black circle and comparing it to the 5-year average. In this case, what we can see is the 5-year average is the recent year is about 90% of the 5-year. So it's lower. I think folks can see that. The recent year is lower than the 5-year, at about 90%. So what we can do is we can go to this short-term axis, look at 90% and place that point right here at 90%. We can then look at the long-term. So the way we were looking at this is we can say the recent 5 years, has it been lower or higher than the long-term average? And in the case of the Chehalis, it's about 75% of this long-term average. So we could see it's lower. So we could come over to our graph here on the long-term and put it here at 75%. So we do that with the Chehalis. We put a dot there that reflects its long-term and its short-term change in abundance. It's in this bottom right column. So what we know is populations that find themselves on this, bottom left, find themselves in the bottom left are experiencing this long-term decline and a recent decline. If you find yourself way up here in the right, these are populations that are experiencing a long-term increase and a recent increase. And if you're right dead center in the middle, you're stable through time. And that's what we would like, right? Is to have these robust fisheries, we're stable through time and we're managing them appropriately to meet that. But here recently, what we hope to see, and I'll highlight this is kind of this chronic area. We would like to take populations out of this chronic area and move them out of this long-term decline and into this recent increase. And through time, shift populations like the Chehalis into the long-term recent increase. So now I'm going to zoom out here or zoom in so folks can see this same graph I just showed more clearly. And I'm going to throw all the steelhead populations on here, and we'll pause so we can sort of absorb what we're looking at. So here we've got all of our coastal populations we're talking about, plus the Nisqually and the Puyallup in gray and in brown. And the way to look at this is we can say all of our populations are on the left side of the graph. So these are all long-term declining populations. And we showed that with the trend lines. But some folks are really interested, well, recent isn't that bad. And what we can see is the recent decline is really highlighted with these populations in sort of this chronic area. Specifically in red, this is the hump tulip. So this is one of these most declining on the short and long term. If we look at this sort of recent increase, we see that, the Hoh River is really stable recent. We've seen this decline, but we're kind of keeping it right there at the escapement goal. The Quileute is similar, but maybe in the last couple of years, we've seen this sort of slight increase. And then the Willapa Bay, as we showed earlier, we've had a couple of years of higher, still under the escapement goal, but higher abundance. So this is one method we're using. We're going to look at the town hall if this is effective for folks, and we'll move these points around, right? When we see these changes or we have a forecast coming in, we can make predictions about which quadrant we're going to fall in. So that's what we've got for sort of these broad patterns in run size. And so that was a lot. We just put a lot of data out there. I'm going to do one more check-in with Leah and make sure there wasn't like a graph there that just didn't make sense or didn't come through.
We do have a couple here. This one says, can you remind me, does escapement shown here describe wild and, where applicable, hatchery spawners? That was from Guy Flesher.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. So, and this is important, and our team flagged this as something we need to highlight. So what we've shown so far is all wild steelhead. We're talking about managing, fisheries, into the future here, over this summer period. And a major constraint is going to be the number of wild steelhead, in terms of meeting these management goals. That said, as we look to sort of where we were last year and moving into the future, we'll show some hatchery data here over the next few slides. So good question. So Kelly talked a little bit about where we've been, but so this section, we're going to review where we were last year. And I want to go all the way back to February of 2020. This was a really important time, I think, for the angling community, for steelhead. I think Fish and Wildlife flagged that there was this major conservation concern. Our tribal co-managers agreed. And so February 2020, we closed the Chehalis and Willapa, two of these populations we had really highlighted as important conservation concerns. We heard quickly from the angling community that communication was not enough. So February and March, we held some meetings. This is after these closures. And, we really learned from the angling community, they want to be more involved in these, in case the panics button hit, they want to know in advance. So come November of last year, we held the public town hall meeting. We talked a lot about that. And this was, an attempt to really get the angling community and the conservation community in front of this concern. And I think we were successful, but we also learned there's more engagement the public wanted. So in December of 2020, we met with the industry, a bunch of different groups, conservation, fishing, and had a lot of great discussions during that time period. December 11th, there was a commission meeting. And then December 14th of last year, we had settled on a significant rule change, and it was implemented. And then in March 8th, we took that rule change and we made an additional change, and we closed a set of rivers along the coast due to increased concerns in season. So that's kind of the quick and dirty version of where we've been, in case you're sort of tuning in now and trying to understand this concern. But I want to sort of move a little closer to just this recent period. So last year we shared some of these bullets. And these were ways we were describing the status quo and this paradigm and sort of the status of not only steelhead, but our management framework and whether we were meeting our goals. And then, so I'll just read these. We had declining abundance in the majority of coastal rivers. We had forecasts well below the escapement goals in many of them. The Chehalis and Hump tulips had failed to meet their goal in at least 3 of the last 4 years, and we'd exceeded the 10% exploitation in numerous years. Willapa Bay had failed to meet its goal in the last 5 years. Queets had failed to meet its goal, and it exceeded 10% in the last 3. And then the Hoko, 2 of the last 4, we had exceeded this escapement goal. And then in the face of that, sort of these declining trends, we were seeing on the right this graph that demonstrates, increased encounters of both hatchery and wild steelhead. So what you're looking at in this graph, it could use a lot more labels, of course, but I just want to use it as an example of this concept that with diminishing, steelhead populations returning, both hatchery and wild, we were seeing, increased effort and increased success by our angling community in terms of interaction with steelhead. So this was kind of framed up the problem statement for us last year. And the way we faced that is we laid out a few potential options just to build discussion around how we should move forward. So we had an early closure option. We had an option where we take the most robust population and focus our fishing pressure around it. That's the Quileute. We had gear and harvest restrictions that were discussed. And then the option 4 was just to close these rivers. And that provided the greatest confidence, that we would meet our management objectives. And so I can remind folks with this little graph, this little boxes, that we were really hoping to, check all these boxes. And that's the guidance from the statewide steelhead management plan. So the coastwide closure provides that, but we also felt that, there may be room for opportunity, moving off the status quo. So after a lot of discussions, where we landed was this single point barbless hook, selective gear rules, no allowance of bait anywhere. And that changed. About half of our rivers moved to no bait. And then, we prohibited fishing from a floating device, closed fisheries on April 1 that normally extended beyond that, and then required the release of rainbow trout, given their important contribution they make to sort of productivity and diversity. So there's a bunch of bullets there, a lot of reasons why we moved forward with this regulation, but we know that this was not a perfect fit for everybody, and we heard feedback. And this next slide, highlights sort of the premise behind what was really the thing we heard the most feedback on. And then this is this rule, no fishing from a floating device. So folks know we have this rule. It exists in our pamphlet and other places, and it's utilized in BC and Oregon and a number of places, but it really hadn't been implemented on this scale in Washington state. And so this was a big deal, and folks reminded us of that. So this graph here shows the difference in catch per unit effort for folks fishing from a boat versus shore. These data were generated from creel work on the Hoh River. And what it shows is really every month of the steelhead season, our boat anglers are much more effective than our shore. So the concept here was by requiring folks to get out of their boat and fish from shore, we would dramatically decrease exploitation rates or catch per unit efforts or success catching steelhead. But we would maintain a fishery. And this was sort of outside of a full closure. We thought we could meet our management goals with this. So I put this slide up there just to recognize that, there's a lot of communication on both sides, a lot of it directly to us, but also a lot of popular press discussions. And I'll keep moving through this, but worth looking at the headlines and seeing that we really saw people on both sides of this discussion. We met some great friends. We had some really challenging discussions, and I think, we hope to move forward here this next year with sort of a more informed understanding of how all these pieces work together. So I wanted to sort of, qualitatively, based on everything we heard and discussions with enforcement and our own team, our monitoring work, some pros and cons with this no fishing from a floating device. And the reason I'm putting this up there isn't to educate folks on stuff they already knew, but really when we get here in, 10 minutes or so, we can talk through, things maybe we're missing. There were pros, there were cons to this rule that we just are not aware of. So the easy ones for us, we know that the no fishing from a floating device is easy to interpret. You're either fishing in your boat or you're not. And so that's a real benefit for any rule, is that it's easy for public and enforcement to interpret. We also know a pro with that piece was that folks were reporting in a new way. Enforcement was getting a lot of phone calls about violations from the public. So that was helpful for enforcement. That said, this is really a new line of work for enforcement. This isn't like changing a hook type or changing the type of gear you're allowed to use. This requires a whole new level of effort and really a new strategy. So there's a big workload associated and probably, a need for increased effort there. Another pro was we had to reduce encounters. This was the prediction, the expectation, but it was really imprecise in the level of what this reduction would be. We know our most successful anglers, those that are guides and those that grew up on these rivers, fish from boats. And so by removing those people from their boats and having them fish from shore, we didn't expect that all of a sudden catch rates were just going to go, just completely bottom out. So we really didn't know how big of a savings this would be. But I think we learned a little bit from it. We'll talk about. So there was public support for some opportunity in the face of these real critical conservation concerns, but there was a lot of dissatisfaction with this type of opportunity with limited methods, season length, and certain user groups that felt they were just displaced from the fishery. A lot of folks said it was the best season they'd seen in terms of experience. There are fewer anglers, maybe that's what people were reporting, and they really enjoyed the slower pace. Other folks said the angler etiquette just went out the window and people were crowding on the banks and the experience just was not what it used to be. And then we had folks that argued this rule provided increased safety. Folks weren't trying to float rivers they shouldn't be, but a lot of individuals that said things got really unsafe on the water, getting out of boats. So that's sort of the qualitative look. I have a couple slides here just showing the sort of quantitative creel work that shows both angler effort and catch. So what we're looking at here, this is hot off the press, and I got to give a big high five to the team out on the Olympic Peninsula. There's a lot of data to go through, but we have these preliminary estimates of angler effort. So this is the number of hours fished in the Hoh River relative to the last few years. And the main point here is that people still went fishing. They didn't hang up their rods. We had effort that was really consistent with the average over the last few years, slightly up from last year, but down maybe from the years prior. Another key component is I've divided this up in gray and black based on where these hours occurred. Were they in the lower Hoh or the upper? The reason we care about that is folks described to us in some rivers this situation where the distribution of anglers moved to these areas where you could wade versus areas you couldn't. And there may be a new conservation concern with a higher impact in some areas than others. So we didn't observe that in the Hoh. It looked like folks, showed up in the places we typically see them, and the upper and lower Hoh was broke up about 50-50. But really the metric, so we know people showed up to go fishing, but how'd they do? And this is the catch per unit effort, the number of fish caught per hour last year versus years prior. It's preliminary. You're going to see a polished number here in October, but it's just important to note so folks can understand how this vertical axis works. 2018, we saw about 0.4 fish caught per hour. So it took about 2 hours or more to catch a fish. What we're seeing now is about 0.2. So it takes about 5 hours to catch a fish for an angler last year on average. So significant reduction. Again, there's a lot of variability around this estimate. So work to be done to tighten this up, but extremely confident, that there was a reduction in effort, or in encounters with wild steelhead. And then this last kind of data slide I'm going to show tonight is really looking at, the core of the work. Like the goal here of making these changes is that we see these populations move beyond this 5-year average. We've been stuck in this rut. I think folks that fish know that these last 5 years have been different than, the last 30. So what we wanted to see was some of these populations in terms of the spawning grounds actually see more fish than we had recently. So this little blue knob there, that's the Hoh River, and it demonstrates that on the spawning grounds, hot off the press preliminary, this could change slightly. Looks like we had about 10% more fish on the spawning grounds than we had, in the last 5 years. That's good news. But when we add the other populations that we're considering here, we see that they sort of bounce around this 5-year average. And a reminder, the 5-year average is that's not a sign of success in most systems. So particularly places like the hump tulips, we actually saw a fewer number of fish on the spawning grounds than we had recently. The Chehalis is another one. in the midst of these regulation changes, it looks like we did not see an improvement. And it suggested that these run sizes, without all the data in hand, may have come in, not met our expectations and come in lower than predicted. There was a question about hatchery populations. I put a few of them up here because it's just a nice gauge for us to see how hatchery populations performed in terms of escapement. It's important to note when you make a giant regulation change like no boat, no, single point barbless hooks, no fishing no fishing with bait, we expect a lot of hatchery fish to scoot by these fisheries in a new way. And we warned, our hatchery teams, we're going to see a bunch of hatchery fish roll in because this rule is going to be successful at avoiding wild fish, but also hatchery. We just didn't see that. The bogus shield was 40% below the 5-year average. And then these other populations, you can see both early and late time programs did not perform well. So this could be that anglers were extremely successful catching them this year and we didn't see them at the hatchery, but that's highly unlikely and probably supports this idea that fish just did not perform as expected. So for time here, I'm not going to pause. We'll have time to get back to it, but I've only got a couple more slides here. And this is talking about the future. Kelly highlighted, we do not have these polished estimates of how we did last year. What was the escapement and the run size and tribal catch and state catch. But we do have sort of a framework we want to move with moving into the summer period. So here's the schedule again, just to highlight, here we are today, our next town hall is October. Between that time, we're going to finalize escapements and forecasts. So that's where we'll be next year. And this discussion around where we're going will get more informed. But to sort of address one of the questions we heard, I built this sort of tree here that describes potential scenarios we could be in. And this is pretty realistic outlook of where we may be. So there's 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is populations forecasted above the escapement. I'll just show you there. So these would be populations performing really well. In that scenario, like these are river specific, population estimates. And if we had a river that was in that scenario, we'd have a diversity of options, right? And this could include the status quo. That's the fisheries we're used to fishing. If have a number of populations or one population even that's forecasted at or below the escapement, we may be looking at reduced seasons and or gear restrictions like we saw last year. And then we may have populations that are forecasted significantly below the escapement level. And this is where we move into this tier where we have in no case exceed 10% exploitation rate. And this could result in the closure of fisheries. So that's sort of our framework moving forward and the way we're taking the information from the statewide steelhead management plan and looking to the future. And then my last slide here, these are just some ideas, and concepts that we're working on. We really need increased precision in our sport fish monitoring. We're managing a steelhead that's extremely sensitive to meeting our objectives. So we need to know how many fish we catch with really high accuracy. We have strategic hatchery programs planned to make sure we're producing fish that show up in the creel and high quality fish, that folks are interested in. We need in-season indicators and triggers. We need them. We're thinking creatively, and we really hope to unveil some new ideas in the future. We're developing these river specific fishery plans to get a little bit more precise on when we're in this scenario, how are we going to move forward? And that's going to involve public engagement. This little tile on the right is an example of an angler etiquette tool. This is work that public affairs and I and the public and angling community has helped with. We have about a dozen of these tiles that we hope it's probably overdue, even aside from these regulations. We hope we get sort of folks in line with this etiquette that us as anglers, we really expect when we're on the water and the conflict and having to educate new anglers can, really ruin the experience. So we want to take some of that responsibility. And then this last one is there's a lot of cool research. Folks on this line have been involved with it, in the public, but just trying to get a better handle on, steelhead biology, a bunch of these unknowns, gear types, and the effect they have on our angling community and wild steelhead. And then, of course, understand this life history diversity piece a little better. So now it's my turn, Kelly. I'm going to have a drink of water, take a breath. I'm going to hand it off to you here, and we'll close out this period of it.
Yeah, thanks, James. Thanks everybody for hanging in there. That's a lot of information. I hope you found it found it useful. So we're kind of transitioning now into the last hour or so of the workshop, and really are looking to you all for any questions that you might have, or things that you think we should be thinking about that maybe you didn't hear tonight. So really anything that's on your mind on that front, we're really interested in hearing about. So again, the reminders are there on the slide with regard to the Q&A function and how to raise and lower your hand. And again, remember to unmute when you're called on. We'll remind you if you don't, so don't worry too much about that. So with that, I'm gonna ask Leah to help us call on folks.
Okay, and first up, Wes. Oh, now I think Wes. Oh, Wes, I have allowed you to talk. You may now unmute.
Are we good?
Yep, we're good. We can hear you.
Okay. The question is on the queets. Historically, there was not an agreed to escapement goal. There was a QIN number and a WDF number, and you're presenting an escapement number and using it in your metrics. What's the number and is it agreed to?
Yeah, thanks, Wes. So, through this, these challenges, we've identified a bunch of these gaps, these places where we need improvement, both technical like Creel and also at the policy level. So you're right. In the queets, I highlighted 4,200. That's the goal that WDFW leans on, as well as the national park. But we do have technical information from the Quinault tribe that has leaned historically on 2,400.
Yep.
But it's worth mentioning, we do not have an agreed to goal. And if you look historically over the last 30 years, you'll see that goal has fluctuated, annually. But in the most recent years, we've moved forward with fisheries in some cases without these management plans. So what we're looking really closely at is that schedule and highlight all of these sort of to-dos, these areas where we just haven't come to the same place, and make sure we get there before we move forward with a fishery. So what you should expect to see in the Queets and other rivers is a clear description this year of our escapement goal. What is our target? Because that's the basic, right, thing that we need as we move forward with fishery. So really, really great, important question. Thanks.
Okay, next up, Chase Gunnell, you asked some questions in the chat. I'm going to allow you to unmute and ask them live.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to say first, thank you, Kelly, James, and staff. It's been great to have this workshop available, and especially to see the timeline for the decision-making process through the fall. My question was a bit of feedback, a bit of question. This whole process and these conservation-oriented regulations are welcome and necessary, but they're so reactive, and I think all of you know that as well as I do. What do you see as you think about your portfolio of tools as proactive strategies that the department and the co-managers and all of us as anglers and stakeholders should be pursuing to get us out of this hole so we're not in this situation here? I know James spoke to that a little bit at the end of his presentation. Anything else you guys would add as far as steelhead recovery strategies that you're considering?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. James, maybe I'll take a stab and then you can add to or correct me or whatever. I mean, one of the things that we're really challenged with out on the coast is a lack of resources for M&E, so monitoring and evaluation, Chase. And I think you're aware of that, and many of the folks on the call have heard us say that before. So a couple strategies we put in place. So we did what I'm calling a couch cushion exercise in the program, where we scrubbed all of our budgets and put together some funding for Region 6. So for James and his staff to put boots on the ground to help us gain a better understanding and really try to start to answer those questions associated with that uncertainty that James talked about. The second thing that happened that I'm really excited about is as a result of the legislative session, we received a proviso attached to our budget specific to coastal steelhead. So we've got a bunch of work we've got to do to get that across the finish line. And we're also going to, you're going to you should be looking for it here within the next week or so, but we're going to be putting together an ad hoc advisory group to help us implement that work that was assigned to us. And one of the big things out of that proviso that I'm extremely excited about is, we're tasked with coming up with a number of different things, not the least of which is monitoring needs for coastal steelhead. So the vision I have for this ad hoc advisory group is to really mimic or closely follow the work that the Puget Sound Steelhead Advisory Group did, and our legislative package that we had some success with last year around what's known as the Quicksilver package. So that's additional money for boots on the ground for freshwater monitoring. So we've got those two things, but in addition to that, we've got an initial green light at the agency level to include an additional decision package or funding request for the 23-25 biennium. So I think we're on the right track with being able to get, as I said, more boots on the ground, a better understanding of the uncertainty that exists out on the coast, which will allow us to be more precise in our management of those fisheries. So I'll pump the brakes there and turn it over to James if there's anything he wants to add or revise. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, and not to sound like defensive or anything, but that like you mentioned, it feels kind of reactionary, and that's pretty accurate. And we as a team, like our Region 6 team, got a bunch of really calm, collected folks that aren't used to just hitting the panic button. So we're looking at each other, saying, this is not the long-term approach is to panic. But I would say that when you release 1,000 steelhead from a hatchery, or you see 1,000 wild steelhead go out into the ocean, we don't get the same thing back from that out migration that we used to. So we are in a new place in terms of managing fisheries at sort of this higher level of precision. It's worth noting, we've had years in the past where we harvested 60 to 70% of wild steelhead coming in, and they did fine following that. So we're not in that place now. And so the sort of idea we're looking at is what Kelly mentioned as a plan, right? We need a long-term plan. But what it would include in places I think you're familiar with and others, I don't even want to say it because it gets people excited, but like on the Skagit and other places, we have tools available. So there's not new tools that we need to develop, to monitor in season. And when we think this run's coming in lower than average, we can monitor with real precision and say, hey, it's Monday and things do not look good, and we're extremely confident in that, and make changes, subtle changes even. And we just haven't applied those tools to the coast. So I have a ton of confidence that, we're in a really tricky spot. We're reacting now, and we're developing, those tools that, would have been nice to have a decade ago, but they're more important now than ever. So good feedback there, Chase.
Okay, our next question is we have a couple questions from John Corso in the Q&A, so I'm going to call on him live so he can ask them.
All right, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. My first question is, and maybe it's been answered already, was whether anyone is working on better technology for counting the various species of anadromous fish that are entering and leaving the OP rivers. And it sounds like there might be something available or being used on the Skagit. Could that technology be used on the OP rivers?
Yeah, it's great. So and I think you have, John, you sound like you know the area, but for those that don't, the OP is really dynamic, right? So it is hard to count fish. So the adult abundance piece, there's new tools like sonar, that we've applied in a couple limited places, but that's one of the low-hanging fruit areas we're looking at to improve our abundance estimates. But also, sport creel is one of those tools that if you look along the coast, it's hard to find a sport fish monitoring program during the steelhead season. So that's a great way to improve our estimate of abundance. And then in terms of out migration, we have some plans to, go for funds focused on juvenile out migration. So we've got, you know, in Chehalis, great smolt trapping program, but it's new. You know, it's really beefed up over the years. And so what we need is, you look at places like Willapa and the Olympic Peninsula, and it's really tough to say, you know, especially given the climate considerations, when a steelhead spawns, what was the fate of its juveniles? And a quick sort of gap there is when they move from the freshwater to the marine. We want to know what happened during that 2 or 3 years they were in freshwater. So data gaps that are important, and really, you know, sort of that high priority work that we need to fill in.
Okay. And can technology distinguish between species of anadromous fish?
Yeah, and I'd say, John, you know, this is an exciting area we should talk more about. But I think the key, you know, not to dig into it here, but the key is that we do have the tools. Didson sonar, we have experts, you know, collaborators outside WW and inside, and there's species composition issues. So folks that don't know, the sonar is counting, you know, blobs swimming by. In the Elwha River, we use this technology and we turn those blobs into fish using a variety of tools, you know, in real time. So this can be limited netting, hook and line, or trapping. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff that, you know, you should reach out and we can talk more about and hear some big ideas.
Okay. All right.
Thanks so much.
My second question was, you know, I understand that a resident rainbow can produce offspring that are anadromous, but I'm not sure I know whether steelhead produce offspring that are resident rainbow that stay in fresh water. Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, I do. And it's cool. When you go back to the slide, there's a life cycle slide, you remember, and there's a paper, it's labeled Kendall and McMillan, and it's a really nice, broad description of this life history diversity we see. And then there's a couple other more fine scale approaches where we measured it. And the short answer is yes. And there's a lot of cool discussion around how productive is a resident rainbow trout produced from an anadromous steelhead, and it's exciting work. So yeah, let's keep that discussion going.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, I had a third question. I was fishing Hart's Lake earlier this year. It's in the Nisqually watershed, and I harvested 3 rainbow, but one of them was very different from the other 2 that were clearly hatchery fish. When I cleaned it, the flesh was, you know, it looked like a sockeye salmon on the inside. And I'm wondering whether you know whether anadromous fish can get into Hart's Lake, and if yes,
yeah, well, how about this, John? I think we should set up a time you and me to chat. I know Hart's Lake well. I fished it. It's a pretty warm, small lake.
Right.
We should talk about it. So yeah, let's save that one for later.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, John.
Okay, there's another question here from Nate, and he wanted to clarify. He said his local fly shop thinks that hatchery plants should be at an all-time high. Is this true?
There's a lot to that. I think the thing we should focus on, and we've talked a lot about this as a program, is what we're really interested in is the hatchery plants that produce abundant adults, right? Because we don't catch the juveniles. You know, if it's a recovery program, the juveniles aren't the one that are aiding in recovery. So depending on why, you know, we may be targeting a hatchery program is something we need to improve on. What we really want to focus on is which ones produce adults that enter the creel, if it's a sport fishing, you know, objective. And so in some cases, increased hatchery plants make a ton of sense, and there's probably places where they don't. So a lot of little details there, but increased hatchery plants, you know, is something that should be on the board for sure.
Nate also had a few other questions. Nate, I have allowed you to unmute. You may ask your questions live. If not, we will go to, I believe it's Rive. Rive, I have allowed you to unmute.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you guys so much for this presentation. It's a lot to unpack and I have quite a few questions, so feel free to cut me off and I can email you later if I'm digging into too much time here. Can we go to the schedule slide?
Yeah.
So just looking at that, it looks like the final escapement numbers will be finalized next month. Is it possible that those will be published prior to the October town hall, or is that something we have to wait till then to see?
Yeah, good question. So what we're trying to do, and our public affairs is just working over the weekend, getting these things as we produce them, getting them to them. So one thing you'll notice, so on those run size graphs we showed, Rive, where we've got the trends, folks wanted to make those graphs themselves. And it's like, you know, instead of everybody emailing for the data, we provided that here at that link. So you can pull those data. That's what I really anticipate is the escapement data when it comes in. We just put it there so folks can look at it. You know, those final escapement estimates are not, you know, there's not a lot of magic involved in making them. It's pretty robust, you know, numerical estimates. And so the other thing I'd mention is a lot of that information is already available on our website. And you can put in a formal request for what we call SGS data, spawning ground survey data. I don't recommend folks do it that way because you end up getting like every single survey that was ever done. And it takes us hours to dig through it, but you know, it's there and folks do request those. So I would say, if you're wondering if, you know, you can have access to data, shoot us an email and we'll send it to you. But all of that should be online. Short answer, yes.
So James, yeah, I like what you said there at the end. So Rive and others, as soon as we have it and we consider it like ready for prime time, meaning that, so what we don't want to do is put something out there and then there's some drama or otherwise some issues with the co-managers and agreement. So what we're trying to do is when we feel really good about things like forecasts and we feel like the conversation with co-managers is at a place where we can share that. We want to do that as quickly as possible. So again, it goes back to what I said on slide number 1 or 2 or whatever it was. And on the bottom of this slide, man, you guys really tune into that coastal steelhead web page. That's going to be updated as we get this type of information that we believe is of interest to you. So whatever we get, when it's ready, it's going on that website. And then we'll be, you know, throughout the remaining 3 town hall meetings, we'll be touching on all of those you know, kind of key points as we progress through the season. So it'll show up on the website. You'll have a chance to take a peek at it, hopefully. And then we're going to be diving into a town hall meeting where we can talk more about it. So that's the intent.
On that, is it possible for public affairs to put together a listserv so we know when that's updated? It's really hard to check it all the time, if that makes sense, when we're not sure when changes will be made.
Yeah, I don't want to make commitments for them. What I will say, Rive, is this is going to be a really fast moving process. You're aware of that. And I don't want to make commitments that we can't get across the finish line, because that's not good for you all and it's not good for us. So I think for, you know, maybe for some of these key issues, you've got the timeline there. This presentation, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be posted on the website. You can revisit the schedule. And if you see, like, for example, mid-August is really kind of the next big deal, spawning escapement estimates finalized, shoot one of us an email and say, hey, is this done and is it on the website? And we'll be able to tell you yes or no.
Okay, great.
Okay?
And then on the schedule, just looking at it, I appreciate all of the touch points we're going to have and the timeline, but we're still looking at a December 1st announcement when the season starts December 1st. So just kind of thinking through, if we're kind of in the same situation as we are this year and the same rules are decided upon, what kind of timeline will that leave for someone to apply for ADA accommodations?
Yeah, so the intent, so that you've hit on the probably the most difficult aspect of this entire schedule and of managing these populations. Our hope is to be able to begin talking about what you can expect in that town hall meeting number 3, maybe even in town hall number 2, where we've got final escapements and preliminary forecasts, and we're going to know, as a department, we're going to know how we feel and where our concerns are, and we're going to be sharing with you those concerns and talking about our issues. So the hope is that, unlike last year, the December 1 announcement isn't the surprise that it was last year. And having said that, we don't know where we're going to land this year, right? So I guess that would be my response to that question, Reve.
Okay, great. Because I know that is a process. And so providing time to jump through those hoops would be appreciated somehow, but not bombarding you guys with, something that's not going to actually come to play also is kind of hard. So looking at some graphs, just for clarification, and again, cut me off if I don't know how many people are raising their hands besides me, but the sport fishing harvest rate graph, that seemed really high given the fact that we've went to catch and release in 2016. Can that be, is there a reasoning or?
Yeah, Reve, thanks. Good question. And this is one of those graphs. You provide all the information that's needed to really walk folks through it. And then we realize that the point isn't to dig into it, rather just show folks there's this assumption that, encounter rate on wild steelhead have gone up. And so, what we're looking at here, and this would be the proper way to display this is, this is sport fishing harvest rate aggregated across coastal hatchery programs. And so you can look at it and say, in 1995, it looks like it was about 36%. What that means is 36% of the hatchery fish that showed up to the river got harvested by sport anglers. So a lot of them moved by into the rack, and some of them were harvested by tribal fishers. And then if you look at the most recent year, you can see we're looking more like 62, 63%. Not quite double, but close. And so this trend line describes that increase in harvest rate. So this isn't wild steelhead. This is for sure hatchery steelhead. But what we know is if anglers are more, or what we assume is that if anglers are more successful encountering hatchery fish, they're likely more successful encountering wild. And so in the absence of creel data, like real-time estimates of sport encounter rates, which we just don't have, we can apply these hatchery harvest rates as a surrogate. So what we could say is, for that first year in 1995, we can make an assumption, depending on the river, 37% of the wild steelhead were encountered and released. If it's a wild steelhead, release rule, which it wasn't then, but if it was. And we can apply a 10% release mortality. So we're kind of digging into the math, but this is just to indicate that we know folks are either becoming more successful at catching fish, or there's more folks out there doing it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think this just, without that background, just kind of overemphasizes or underemphasizes the fact that we have made significant changes, something that wasn't highlighted in an article put out by the tribe, that the state has made a lot of changes to try and protect this fishery. And I don't think that does a good job of sharing that. So the Ho angler effort graph, towards the end, and I might have gotten the name of that one wrong.
Let's see here. Sorry if I'm making people dizzy.
Sorry. Yeah. So my analysis of creel data showed an overall reduction of anglers for the season. And that's not reflected here. If you were to look at another river system, the Quileute system, for example, would you see this being a lot different, especially given the fact that the Ho is a lot more accessible by bank?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's the question about precision. Sort of address your analysis. I haven't seen it. It's hard to make a comparison. But it's important to know, just if folks are looking at data, and these data are online, so folks can grab them. But what we're looking at here is the number of hours fished. We should reflect that there's an effort piece of this, right? Like our creel folks on a really rainy day without anybody out there may not sample a lot of folks. Or maybe somebody calls in sick and they didn't get out there to sample, catch that day. So there's a fewer number of people sampled that week. So the error bars, the precision around that estimate would become larger. So it's important also, Reve, we recognized that this was a big deal, right? This rule, and the hoe is really the place we have to monitor it. We have high quality data for years. So that emphasis on the hoe required folks to get up a little earlier, work more than their 40 hours, and try to get in front of as many anglers as possible to increase precision. So if you just looked at number of fish, number of people interviewed, we did great. We sampled a huge rate of the number of anglers. So that's cool. And we were high-fiving. But of those anglers, it looks like, you know, and the number of hours fished, you know, increased a bit, but the actual catch per unit effort, you know, looks to have declined. So hope that answered that. But
Yeah, well, and thank you for clarifying this as angler hours. So
Hey,
overall angler count, did that go down? Even on the hoe, because that's the most robust.
yeah,
So
I don't know.
Ray, so James, if you got an answer to that question, that's awesome. Otherwise, Ray, you said I could cut you off, and we're going on about 5 minutes here. So use the portal on the website for additional questions, but I want to make sure everybody who has a question has a chance to ask it. So I'm gonna take you up on your offer and cut you off. Apologies.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And our next question is from Brian McLaughlin. Brian, I have allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Brian.
Thank you. And I want to echo what other people have said. I really appreciate the department and you two individuals putting together this this process and you know, also spending your evening with us going through it. I think it's very helpful. My first question is, you showed some declining trends in the Puyallup and Nisqually. My understanding is that marine mammal predation has been identified as a significant factor in the decline of Puget Sound steelhead in general, and I think also on the Nisqually in particular. And I was wondering, do you have a sense, and I know you may not have all the data you'd like to have, but do you have a sense of whether marine mammal predation is also a significant factor in the declining productivity long-term that we see in the coastal populations?
Yeah, I do have a sense of it. I guess I would start before I go too far out on a limb. We have a working group here that involves multiple states, you know, trying to wrap their head around this increase in abundance in marine mammals. So it's well documented now. And some people have described this as the Marine Mammal Protection Act worked. And so I would say in places like the Columbia, where folks have put their heads together and tried to understand what type of actions could we take to address this, they've been, you know, somewhat successful. That said, it's extremely challenging work. So I'm a little bit on standby, waiting to see how that working group performs, and we can provide more information from wildlife, who manages these, you know, marine mammal populations. That said, the information you just provided is accurate and consistent with what I know, that, you know, it's a contributing factor to steelhead mortality. Whether it is a contributing factor to steelhead productivity, that's a little bit harder to answer here live, but I'd be happy to chat with you more about it offline, and we could share the information we have and see where we get.
Okay, and just one more question. When you showed the catch per unit effort reduction in the hoe, I was just wondering, that seems consistent with what you predicted would occur with especially a no fishing from boats. But have you been able to tease out how much of that reduction is attributable to the regulations you imposed, especially the no fishing from boats, versus variations in run size or river conditions or something other than the regulations you put in place?
We haven't, no, short answer. And that level of kind of resolution analysis. So what we really want to do, you go to the team and you're like, hey, we need a full evaluation of the no fishing out of a boat rule. Well, you know, any sort of scientist is going to say, okay, here's all these variables I hope you controlled for. And that wasn't what we did. We were looking for a regulation that provide confidence that we could implement a fishery as an alternative to a full closure. And what this shows, and you mentioned an important piece, I'm just going to stick on it for a second because this is just a really good question. So a lot we don't know about what we're observing here. But I'm going to go back to this slide. And if folks were here last year, we shared this and we said, we see up to a 5 times increase in the number of fish caught by folks from boat versus those from shore. And we said, we don't really know what happens when those folks get out of their boat and start fishing from shore, but we don't expect a 5-fold decrease in the encounter rate. We expect more like half, but it could be less, it could be more. So not a lot of precision around what we were expecting to see. So this extremely preliminary estimate here, and it makes all of our biologists uncomfortable because they stayed up late to come up with it. But this preliminary estimate suggests that it likely had an effect. It's a pretty stable catch per unit effort in this part of the coast. And we saw a significant decline. So lots of questions on why that is, but seemed like a quick data point we should be looking at. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and next, it looks like Nate is back ready. Nate. Oh, sorry. Now, I'm sorry. He is not. He's not on the call at all anymore. Must be having some technical difficulties. Okay, Ed Firkin, you have your hand raised. I have allowed you to speak.
Hi. Once again, like everybody said, I would like to thank everybody involved in Region 6 management, especially James. James, I know he did not receive all the best feedback after the latest rule change last season. So I'm glad to see him still here and still kicking. It makes a lot of us that live here on the coast feel better that we've got somebody that really cares and wants to put in the time and the effort and deal with all the feedback, negative or positive, that you can get regarding
Thanks, Ed.
all
Appreciate
this.
that.
Yeah, appreciate you, James. The first question that I had, actually, first off, I would like to address the question the gentleman earlier had about the catch per unit effort on the hoe of 2020 versus 2021. And I would just like to add in the fact that 2021 had way more fishable days conditions wise than last season. And the seasons were about the same length due to the COVID closure last year. So I would gather from my personal experience and all the guides and anglers that I personally know that the rules did indeed have an effect on that catch rate. Secondly, seeing from the graphs, we've seen that the most fish get caught by boat anglers. We've been talking about this for almost 2 hours now, so everybody knows that. And most of those boat anglers, being guided boat anglers, catch the most of the fish. Yet it's been a long time since anybody has discussed any type of guide legislation, potentially limiting the number of guides on certain watersheds and or reducing the number of out-of-state guides. Because if you would talk to any local guide, or just see it out there, you see that the out-of-state guides don't really have the same amount of investment, reverence, what have you, towards a certain watershed, because if certain places closed, they just go somewhere else. Versus people that have lived here their entire lives, they have their families here. They can't just pack up and take their whole operation elsewhere. So given the fact that the out-of-state guide, just the license rate hasn't been increased in a number of years, and there is no limit to the amount of guide licenses and how easy it is to get a guide license. I'm just curious if that's been considered at all, because there are more and more guides every year, and that does not help the pressure and the impact on these fish.
Yeah, James, I'm going to take a stab at this one. So is this Ed?
Yes, sir.
So hi, Ed. I don't think we've met, but thank you for the question. So just a couple things. So the guide numbers have not increased year after year after year. In fact, they've been relatively stable, right at about that statewide number of about 570, if I remember correctly. It's been a minute since I looked at the data, but the last time I looked at it, it's been pretty stable. And actually in the recent years, when I say the recent years, I think it's like 2019 and 18, there was actually a drop in the number of guides. So I think that's important. the statement you made about there hasn't been any guide legislation. You might not be aware of this, but I think it was back in either 2016 or 2017, we received legislative authority to implement a guide logbook system, which we've done. The purpose of that logbook system was to help us answer a number of different questions, not the least of which is what kind of impact does guiding have on local economies or the state economy, and how many of our licensed recreational anglers access fisheries via guides as opposed to kind of the everyday, the everyday person. What are the demographics of those folks? Are they elderly? Are they young? Are they just getting into fisheries and try to utilize the expertise that's provided that our guides in the state have to be able to learn how to fish? So a number of different questions, and also kind of that effort piece, I think, which is what you're getting at. How many fish a day are, as a guide did you touch? What were the species? Were they hatchery? Were they wild? So we have this system in place, but the challenge we've had in implementing is the first full year of it, we had to close, as James mentioned, we had to close fisheries early because of these conservation concerns. And then last year, I don't think we can count on any level given the COVID response that the agency had when we closed down fisheries all across the state during prime, steelhead and spring Chinook fishing time. So we've got a system in place. It was authorized by the legislature, was approved by our commission. It's in place. The expectation is that guides are utilizing that system to report their activities. And we hope to be able to have a much better understanding of all things guiding, benefits, to economies, all those things I described. We hope to have a much better handle on that in the future as we have more confidence in the data. So just wanted to, kind of share with you what has happened that you might not be aware of. So thanks for the question, Ed.
Thank you, Kelly.
And next up is Brian Blake. Brian, oh, it looks like Brian has dropped off, but Brian asked a question about if we were receiving tribal data up to date.
Yeah, short answer is yes. And it's worth sort of mentioning that our co-managers in Grace Harbor area, Quinault tribe, we share management responsibility across 4 systems. This is a big one. So we spent a lot of time talking about how to accelerate this thing. And so that schedule is one they're really supportive of, and it requires a lot of data exchange, both from us to them and them to us. And yeah, so short answer is yeah. Good question though.
The next question is from David Moskowitz. David, I've allowed you to talk.
Thank you very much. David Moskowitz here with Conservation Angler, and appreciate the opportunity and the long hours that staff are putting forward to let people participate in this, especially since a lot of times the meetings are daytime and not everybody can make those, but appreciate that very much. I'd like to start out by saying that there was a point earlier, I think it was Chase Gunnell, who talked about what are you going to do proactively. I would like to say that on that question, your job is actually to be reactive when the situation calls for it. And I think the action you took last fall was completely appropriate. But that being said, I definitely agree with Chase. There's some we've talked a lot about anglers and effort and fishing rules, but we haven't talked that much. The questions have not been very focused on the fish themselves. And here we're gearing up with this very detailed public outreach program through the summer and fall and early winter. And, it's again focused on just what's ahead of us. in the next fishing season, 2021, 2022. So we think it's really critical that we be looking ahead at what is going to be the long-term play here. And to start, there's a couple big issues in our mind. And one is that we have a big problem with early wild winter steelhead in almost all these systems. And it's an artifact of heavy harvest and hatchery fish. So far, there doesn't seem to be anything to deal with that. It's not going to be something that we solve with one season's worth of regulations or even two. But I'd be interested in hearing from the staff, what are some of your long-term plays to try to get at issues like this big hole for the early winter fish, which are a critical part of the overall health of the run. And the other point I'd like to make, because we talked a lot about science and when's this data going to be available, and everybody's getting really focused on what kind of data got collected this past year. But what we do know is what the trend is in just about all these rivers. And it's not good, which is why we're here tonight. But in the end, you guys are going to have to make a decision in November for this coming season. And you're not going to have all the answers. So I have to say, I was heartened to hear that you're getting some money from the legislature to try to close some of those data gaps, but those are not going to get closed in one season. And so I urge the staff to keep in mind that your decisions are not going to be based on perfect data, and you're going to have to use the precautionary principle so that your decision about this next coming season is not going to foreclose opportunity for future steelhead anglers, people who may not even fish yet or may not even be born yet. But if we don't make the right decisions in a precautionary manner, we're going to lose some of these fish. And that's the mission that you guys have to carry on. So we really urge you to keep the long-term in mind while you're doing all of this work that's really focused in on just one upcoming season. But I would like to hear what there is a question in this. What are you guys doing besides the idea of, say, an advisory group? What kind of specific things are going to be happening so that the agency is working proactively on OP steelhead?
Yeah, thanks, David. A lot to unpack there. So let me just say this. So you're right. This is focused on this season by design, right? This whole planning process is a communication plan and a partnership with everybody on this call and anybody else who cares about steelhead to walk through the data we have this year that's going to inform this season with the ultimate goal of landing on what next year's fishing seasons look like. So you're right. That's what this is about. It's not about necessarily the things that you described, with the exception of, and you heard James talk about it, we're looking at the past in terms of returns. We're looking at the future in terms of what ocean conditions and other factors are looking like, and we're worried about that, right? You heard James talk about that. We've been talking about it for quite a while. So we're using the past, we're looking at the future to try to make the best decisions we can when those decision points come up. So there's that. The other piece that you brought up is, what are we doing to as an agency or as a program, I can't remember how you phrased it, to talk about steelhead populations. And I think you framed it up specific to the coast, or maybe you said OP, but we're taking that a step further. We're looking at steelhead populations from a statewide perspective. And I think you were involved in a conversation that was hosted by the director. There were multiple conversations with fishing groups and those interested in fishing. And I'm positive, David, that you you were part of that, and you heard me talk about a fish program Steelhead Summit that we were planning. You recall hearing about that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm happy to announce that last week we wrapped up a month and a half, 2 months long. I think it was 8 half-day meetings as a program, as a fish program, talking about nothing but steelhead, the issues that we face in particular systems across the entire state, whether it be Region 1 and the inability for fish who overshoot a dam to be able to get back. So we identified all of these issues, and in addition to those issues, we identified the concerns we have for these fish into the future. And our next step in that process is to frame up M&E programs and legislative requests and partnerships that are going to allow us to make progress. So I know that was, I just spit out quite a bit there, but that would be my answer to your question. And having said that, more than happy to have additional conversations with you and pick your brain on things you think that we should be doing that we might not be, or that we might have missed in our internal conversations.
I really appreciate that. And just a quick follow-up, I'm wondering what is publicly available, or what will be publicly available from your internal effort? When?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we're working on next steps right now out of that. So one of the things we're going to be doing is kind of writing up a synopsis of a, kind of high level, what the key elements of the summit identified. We're going to be sharing that internally with the rest of the agency once that's done. And then that's going to be something that, we're going to have available to folks on our website. And it's going to, the hope is that we're able to identify what I call a to-do list that's prioritized. So where we have the greatest concerns about existing populations and the future of those populations, we're going to prioritize those populations in those areas for things like legislative requests or additional research. So don't have a timeline for you right now. The Steelhead planning process is taking up a lot of time for our Region 6 folks, myself included. In addition to that, we're gearing up for submission of our budget requests for the supplemental, and we're monitoring a whole bunch of fisheries that are happening now and will be happening this fall. So it's a work in progress.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey, I might just add one thing there, Kelly. David's in the run timing piece. You talked a lot about that. We're going to dig into that at the next town hall. It's important for folks that have that coho fishery they really want to hold on to in November, December, from their boat. If that regulation's on the table, we need to understand what is the impact of steelhead during these different times. And then the changes in those run timings are things we should keep talking about. And then the other piece in the long-term plan, I want folks to really understand, it's really important to note that we don't have a team of people wondering what we should do. The tools are available for us to apply on the coast. The science is ready for us to apply them, but the resources don't live in Region 6 right now. And so, we need to push go on things like risk-based management. So we heard last year, a lot of folks say, if we can't fish from our boat in the Quileute, that's, overprotective. It's a low risk thing, not letting us fish from a boat. So we want to be able to apply numbers to these regulations. And that's the goal over the next year, is to develop those tools. So
David, there's an element that I forgot to mention that's a key to your specific question about what are we going to do on the coast. And you heard me talk about the proviso, the budget proviso we received. That's going to be key to that. When we start working through that, and checking the boxes associated with the proviso, that's all work that's going to speak to your question.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. See, we only have a few minutes left, Leah. Maybe take a couple more questions.
Yep, we have one from Greg Fitz. Greg, I have allowed you to talk. You want to unmute?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, if there's a second, I would love to hear a little bit of a breakdown, just general trends or status on the tributaries of the Quileute. It gets aggregated in the charts you're showing, but each of those tribs are pretty different and they get a lot of different attention, really popular among anglers, but they're not all doing it as well. And I would like to hear just a little bit about how that could break down.
Yeah, thanks. So I showed this graph. I'm going to see if I can come up with this really quick with the limited time, but what you're talking about is creating this graph, but for the Quileute. We can do that for the Willapa and other places. I don't have that built right here in front of me, but what I do have is these escapement trends. Can folks see that?
Yeah,
it's
that
up, James.
work. Cool, I'm glad that worked. So what we're looking at here is these tributaries you're talking about: Bogoshiel, Solduck, Kalawa, Dickey. And these are escapement estimates, not run size, right? So there's the number of fish on the spawning grounds. And you can see each one gets a line. All but the Dickey are negative. Dickey's sloping negative, but not significantly. And then something worth noting, the Solduck, you'll see that orange bump there, watching that closely. And then, the Bogoshiel looks stable. The Kalawa took a little bit of a dip this year. So for folks to recognize, when we say the Quileute has a escapement goal, we have an agreed to escapement goal with the tribes based in really solid information that suggests there's a level of fish we need on the spawning grounds to maximize productivity. You can also look at those goals river by river here and see if we're meeting them. And it's a mixed bag of success. And what you'll see last year is the Solduck really lofted that goal up. And I couldn't say that in every year in the past, but it's worth noting. And the Kalawa is one that we'd like to continue to sort of watch that trend. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. It's just good to look at this. I think when we're aggregating the Quileute as a whole, it sometimes overlooks the nuances, particularly around how the Bogoshiel is struggling. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, so I think I'm going to jump in here with just a couple minutes left and round us out. So again, use that link that you see on the bottom of the screen there. If we didn't get to your questions, or if after kind of digesting what you've heard or having some time to think about what you've heard, you got an idea or a concern or just whatever, that's the place to share the information with us. We really want it badly. The other thing I'd like to do is just kind of maybe rehash where we're going next. So the next kind of milestone that we're talking about is going to happen in the middle of next month, where per our agreement with co-managers, we're going to have our spawning escapement estimates finalized. Early September, we're going to be exchanging kind of the preseason forecast with tribal co-managers, working toward getting to that agreement. Early October, we're going to have the forecast agreements with the tribes. Mid-October, we're going to start those co-manager meetings on the management plans, and then we're back together for our second town hall in October. So pay attention to the website. There's going to be some stuff that's added between now and October that you're probably going to be interested in. If the other thing you can do is I think most of you know how to get a hold of James and myself and James's team. That's an option as well. Just be advised, it's really a struggle to get to all of those things. It's going to be much easier for us to have it in one place. So that's kind of what's on deck for between now and October. Maybe close this out by again thanking you for your time and your effort. James and I got accolades and were lauded for this work, and really the vast majority of those accolades need to go to James's staff in the region, who are collecting the information and helping us think through things and helping us put these presentations together, and it's really those folks that deserve to coin a phrase from James, that really deserve those high fives. So with that, again, thank you for your time. I hope you found this valuable. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll be in touch. Take care, everybody. Thank you.